Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is LawPod.
Hello and welcome to LawPod by Queen's University Belfast. My name is Melissa McDonnell and I am an undergraduate SWAN representative for the School of Law. The purpose of this podcast is to discuss study options available to Level 2 undergraduate students and to consider the career paths which they may facilitate. This podcast will focus on legal theory. Therefore, if you're a Level 2 law student, this podcast is worth listening to as module selection for third year is approaching very, very soon. With me today, I have two speakers. Mark Hanna is here from the School of Law, and Claire McCann is here from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Consortium. So let's get started. Mark, we're going to start with you. So can you tell us what legal theory is and what the module is about and how it is taught in relation to lectures?
Okay, so legal theory, yeah, it's a module that students have the option of taking in the third year of their undergraduate studies, and it's essentially the clue is really in the name. It's a module about the theory of law, and that's a subject that really students won't have come in contact at all with beforehand. And it's been quite different in some respects from some of the more doctrinal legal subjects that they take. So it's really quite, if you were to boil it down to what is legal theory about, I guess you could say that it's about the question, what is law, and looking at law in a more kind of abstract way. And I think that that's a very valuable thing to do, actually. And, some universities, encourage their students or actually oblige their students to take legal theory courses in the first year of their legal study because it helps them to develop the analytical skills and to be able to think about law in that kind of abstract way, which is really essential for working with law. So that's really what it is. It's an optional module, and it used to be obligatory module for students who are studying law, but in the last few years it's an optional module now, so it's a choice there for students to take.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell us how legal theory is assessed? Legal
theory is assessed through coursework. There's no exam for it. It's through essays, and the essays that I've done together on the course together with Dr Catherine McNeely, who's a module coordinator. We have done it in the last 2 years. Is we break it down into two parts, and there's an A part and a B part to the assessment. So, and altogether that's about 4,000 words. So 2,000 word essays.
Okay, and what do you think are the benefits or advantages of choosing legal theory for students?
I think, as I kind of said before, I think it's really a subject that teaches you to be able to work with law on another level. I think, essentially, I think what it helps students to do is to be able to think critically about law and to work with law on a more analytical level. And I think that, it's not compulsory for students to take that course anymore. And so they don't really, I think there's been a move away from really seeing it as being a key skill, the law. But the last university I worked at in The Hague, actually we had a professor who came from Harvard, and he had done empirical research asking employers in America, what skills that they were looking for in the graduates that were coming out of law school. And he said, all of the employers that they surveyed were really, the top skills they were looking for was creativity and kind of innovative skills and being able to think critically about things. And I think that that's fundamentally what you get from a legal theory course, because you're asking the questions of, what is law? And I think with, law in comparison to some of the other STEM subjects now, there's a kind of renaissance around those STEM subjects and things because there's this great excitement about them because there's a feeling that when you study them, things like quantum physics or biology and botany and things like that, and even in terms of computer science and AI and things, that there's this kind of feeling that there's so many. Once you start studying those subjects, it suddenly becomes clear how many things that you don't know, and the subject kind of opens up and has such a kind of rich depth to it. And I think people are really attracted to that now. But law has become, doctrinal law and the study of law isn't typically been like that, because you just study the rules, and if you know the laws sort of thing, then it's quickly, the more you study it, the more you know, and there's no real unanswered questions for it. And so legal theory is really taking a deeper look, and there is, once you start looking into legal theory and really looking into what is law and what's the function of law in society, then it really opens that subject up, and I think it makes it a lot more interesting. And again, that is something that, helps students to develop, kind of mental aspects that they hadn't developed in the rest of the degree. So I think there's huge cognitive benefits to studying legal theory. And it's just studying law on another level. And I think it really might give students that edge when they come to the job market, that they have that kind of level of critical thinking.
Okay, and as you said, legal theory is interesting, but what would you say to students who are perhaps apprehensive about taking it on?
Well, I think, the thing is, and I've said this to Catherine many times, is when we've talked about it, is nobody knows what legal theory is before they do it. Because it's different from the more doctrinal legal subjects, where it's just about learning rules and arguing about the meaning of those rules. There's no real experience before in the 2 years previous to the legal study about what legal theory is and about asking the questions that we're asking in legal theory. So I would say, first of all, that students should have an open mind. I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think that it's for a bigger class of students than they realise. And I think that, you have to have an open mind about the subject and try to find out more. And this is probably one of the good things maybe about doing a podcast is, that hopefully, it makes other people who wouldn't traditionally think about it, that they would think about it. I think we'd like to see a bigger diversity of students coming to it. But I think from what I understand, one of the concerns that students maybe have about it is they think it's going to be a difficult subject, and it is maybe difficult in some ways, but I don't think it's more difficult than other subjects. And if we looked at the marks that typically that students get on the course, they're in line with marks in other courses, and students generally do very well on the course. So I think, the message I would say is that to students is to keep an open mind and to investigate really what it's about, and to consider that it would give them some real benefit in terms of critical thinking, cognitive abilities about working with law that would be important for a legal career, or indeed in many other careers. And yeah, I think that would be it.
Okay, and in your opinion, what skills do you think students gain from the module?
Yeah, again, critical thinking skills would be the major one. Thinking critically about the law, and because law is such an institution, in society, and typically we don't question, what is law, what's law for, and really is law functioning properly in terms of society, and how should law be developed. It's such an institution. It's come down to us from ivory towers in many senses, and it has a lot of ritual about it. That if you think about how the courts operate here, and the wearing of wigs, and that everyone rises when the judge comes in and things like that, that's all this ritual around law is reflection of the fact that law is such a deep institution in society, and that people don't question law nearly as much probably as they should, or analyze it and really think about what it is and what it should be for. So I think there's like a massive advantage in terms of developing critical thinking, and and working with theoretical concepts about what is law, and going through the material that we go through. I think students learn a certain intellectual dexterity, let's say, and they train themselves in a certain intellectual dexterity and working with those concepts that are a bit different from these kind of cut and dry rules. And so, yeah, I think, if you're going into a legal career, I think it's really essential to have that kind of ability not to be fazed by theoretical complexities. And certainly, if you look at the judges, in the judiciary, a lot of the top judges do have that ability to, when they're faced with kind of theoretical complexities, they're not fazed by it, and they're able to deal with them in a kind of very practical way. But that's a sort of theoretical skill set that they have. So I think, if you're going into a legal career, it's very useful. But I also, as I said, I think it's that kind of critical thinking and that ability for abstract thinking is also is a very transferable skill, and it's a skill that has massive applications in many different professions, and I think that that's really what employers are looking for. And of course, employers don't always articulate it like that, and people think, well, I need to get this subject, I have to have company law and I have to have this, but this is a skill that, that it really is required in the workplace, especially the workplace that's evolving in modern society today, and maybe employers aren't articulating it as such as like that, but I think that really when you dig into it, that's exactly, one of the things that they are looking for.
Yeah, I would like just to re-emphasise that. I think what legal theory gives in a way that maybe other law subjects don't is an imagination, creativity about how you approach the subject. Because you're coming at it from a completely different direction. You're not coming at it as application of rules and how can I think about this rule a little bit differently. You're actually rethinking what that rule is for and saying, well, what's it trying to achieve? Is it achieving that thing? Is there a better way of achieving that end? And from a policy perspective, which is where I come from, that's hugely important. But also from the pragmatic legal development of rules, it's really important that you have people that are pushing to reinterpret these in a new and interesting, divergent way from how the doctrine has been interpreted before. So I think that's the real advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is creativity, in a sense. We don't really associate law with creativity, but there is a creativity in these kind of in its theoretical approach to law, and that's looking for alternative solutions and questioning, established institutions. I think that is the hallmark of creative thinking. So I think that, that's I would emphasize that point as well. It really is about engendering a kind of creativity in the thinking of law students as well.
Okay, so around certain modules there's myths and perceptions that they're only for females or males, which is totally untrue. What is the typical gender breakdown of students on the legal theory module?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but to my mind, I think it's more or less even, I would say. I don't see a huge disparity in that. It might be a little bit more that female would take the subject, but I don't think there'd be a huge disparity in that sense.
Okay, and how do students then perform typically in the module? You said overall it's typically good, but have you got any more information on that, or?
Typically good, I think, generally in the range of 2-1s, and we don't have many fails, to be honest. And that's probably goes against the popular conception about the subject. I think people hear the word theory and they think, oh no, that's going to be really difficult, and there's no hard and fast answer, and therefore there's real room for failure. One of the things I always say to students at the beginning of that course is, yeah, there might not be like hard and fast answers the way there might be in some of the other subjects, like, what are the conditions of the formation of contract, and you can kind of go through them in a listing sort of way. Might not have that same kind of concrete formula to learning it, but that works two ways. It also means that what we're looking for when we're assessing students is not that they're able just to do rote learning, but really that they're able to show that kind of creativity in their thinking. And I think, students underestimate themselves in that respect. And we see, that students really do have that facility. And that's why they generally tend to perform well in this subject, once they just know that that's what we're kind of looking for and focus their efforts in that respect.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to move to Claire. So firstly, can you tell us a bit about your background and your current role?
Sure. I am from here, and I went to university in Dublin at Trinity College, which was a really doctrinal university. Most of the lecturers I had there were barristers, so they taught about the rules and how they were applied. So that was my kind of legal training when I was an undergrad. After my degree, I stayed in Dublin for a few years. I worked in a law firm. I worked in the Irish Human Rights Commission, and I did my master's part-time. And my master's was that moment, I call it my red pill moment, which you might not get for younger listeners because it's a reference to The Matrix, which I now know is 20 years old, which makes me feel incredibly old. But it was the thing that kind of made the scales fall off my eyes. All of a sudden, all of these rules that were a given were being reinterpreted in front of me because there was something more. There was a reason why they existed. All of the assumptions upon which the legal system is based were kind of being pulled down in front of me, and I was like, oh my God, it's all starting to make sense. So I've had the good fortune during that to live 6 months in South Africa in Cape Town. I then moved back to Dublin and decided to apply for a PhD in Queen's. And after my PhD, I worked for a while in the higher education sector in England, and I moved back to Northern Ireland 3 years ago, and I'm a policy officer with the Human Rights Consortium. So that's a potted history of my background. And my current role as a human rights officer is a policy-based role. So essentially our job is to feed into macro political discussions on human rights issues in Northern Ireland. And if necessary at a UK level or an Irish level, given the context of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the human rights safeguards within that, but also because we're a membership organisation to do outreach with our members around Northern Ireland and work with what they're interested in, etc. So it's kind of a macro looking up and a micro looking down and working on issues with our members as well.
Okay, thank you. Did you study legal theory as a student, and can you tell us a bit about it?
Did I study legal theory? No.
No.
And I feel I should probably paraphrase that slightly, because I did in my undergraduate degree constitutional law in Ireland, and Irish constitutional law has built within it a whole arc of reasoning in relation to natural law theory and positive law, and that's built into studying constitutional law in Ireland, because there's a whole range of cases where they develop this human rights theory from natural law. It's a very particular interpretation of natural law. It's very Catholic in its origin, etc., like a lot of natural law theory is. But it wasn't until I did my master's that I started to engage with theory. And at that point, I was actually able to re-engage with those narratives that I've been thinking about as an undergraduate doing constitutional law, but also the underpinning theory behind all of that law that I've been working on previously, and understand a bit more that the legal system and how it works and how it operates isn't a given. It's structured in a way to make it work in a particular way, and that has happened over time through traditional mechanisms, etc. And it really was as a postgrad that I was able to have that moment where I was able to reinterpret what I'd learned as an undergraduate. So I think you're really lucky in Queen's to have the opportunity to do it as an undergrad. I think it's brilliant. Every student should do it.
So Mark touched upon legal theory being abstract, an abstract subject to study. How can it be of use in practice today?
Well, we've talked about creativity and how it lends itself to creative thinking and to, I suppose, thinking about problems in a different way, thinking about solutions in a different way. So if you're a lawyer, for example, or a barrister, and you're making arguments or just trying to think imaginatively about how you make them. In terms of my job as a policy worker, it's really important because it helps you identify those structures that exist in society that are the reasons why things work in a certain way. And if you know that they exist, you can see them. It's like The Matrix, and why I use that reference, because when you can see the structures, you can never unsee them. And that's what critical theory gives you. So any policy document I'm working on, for example, I'm very conscious of the legal structures, how they operate and why they operate as they do, to reproduce and reinforce certain things. And when you care about social justice like I do, and so the reason I work in the area I work in is because I care about those things, I can actually see how these systems can be used both to oppress but also to empower people. And it's about finding a way to flip these narratives about how the legal system works in a particular way to think about it a bit more imaginatively. So actually it feeds into every piece of work I do, every engagement I do with a member organisation, whether it's, talking about a particular human rights issue or whatever. That kind of legal theoretical underpinning, when you get beyond the heart and the working or whatever. It's actually about how you think. Once you get past doing essays and past education out into the real world, it actually just changes the way you think, and that's what makes it really useful in any job you do.
Can I just also say, I didn't want to use the word abstract as a bad word sort of thing, and I think that it's problematic to, to distinguish too much between what you call abstract and what you call practical. I think, any practicing lawyer to be successful needs to be able to deal with some level of abstraction, and there's really, if you look at the key skill in the arguing legal cases, there's a lot of abstraction involved in that, and abstracting, legal principles down and reapplying them in other sort of senses. So I think, I don't mean abstraction in any kind of sort of, woolly pie in the sky sort of thing, but applied abstraction.
Okay. So Claire, what types of theories influence your work in policy?
Well, I suppose the theories that I find most useful to my work are critical theory. And don't get me wrong, like Hart's really important to understanding how the UK Constitution works, and Kelson's really good at helping you understand how international law frameworks work and how they interplay with, what's happening on the ground. Fine, and I have to engage with some of these kind of abstract concepts in the work that I'm doing, because I work on Brexit, so you need to understand this interplay between Northern Ireland's constitutional structure with the UK constitutional structure with the European constitutional structure, and so those drier theorists, I suppose, underpin some of that thinking, although I don't really think about it that much. But the things that really impacted on me and impacted on how I think were critical theories. So whether it's feminism, critical race theory, queer theory, etc., these were the things that started to break down the boundaries between what were before that very clear white lines about where the logic of something was. If you engage with critical race theory, you can never again look at the legal system without seeing it as an institution of white power. If you engage in feminist theory, you can never again look at the legal system and not see it as an institution of male power. So I'm in a very privileged position, being, white, middle class, well educated, cis, heterosexual, etc. I'm kind of in that comfort zone of society. And what critical theory does is it reminds you that all of those things that you treat as normal are just because we've built the system around how I see the world. And so it really helps me kind of check my privilege, for want of a better term, and check how I think about things, not to think that my norm, my worldview is the worldview that everybody else has. And so that's where I think critical theory has a real value.
Okay, that's very interesting. So if students were to take on legal theory, how would they be able to contribute to your work in policy or your organisation?
Well, I think, and I've said this already, I think once you get out into the real world, it's not about the theories and who said what, etc. I think it's how you think. And I think once you've embraced it, you can never go back. And that's why I love the Matrix analogy, because what happens in the Matrix, and I'm sorry for anybody who hasn't seen it, but I think it's cultural knowledge now. What happens in the Matrix is you have Keanu Reeves, gormless guy, walking around, doesn't know what's happening. And you have somebody saying to him, I have the chance here to tell you how the world really works. And you can either choose to ignore it and go along in your gormless little face and whatever, or you can take the red pill and you can be plunged into a world where all of a sudden you can never see the world without all of the matrix around you. And I think from that moment on, from the moment you engage with theory, you can never go back to not having that knowledge. It just flips a switch in your head, and it will affect every conversation you have down the pub with your mates over something. You'll just see the world differently, and there's no going back from that.
In the Human Rights Consortium, is there any internships or placements available for students at level 2 or level 3?
We don't have enough funding to have internships or placement opportunities with students. We are a very small organisation. We are 4 members of staff. We currently have 1 staff off on maternity leave. We don't know whether we're going to be able to afford to have somebody in to cover her work over the period. So that's the kind of stage of funding that we're at. We do have volunteer opportunities, however, and when we have them, they're usually for specific projects. For example, during our Human Rights Festival, we rely on volunteers to help us out in the organisation, running events, etc. When we have large conferences, things like that, we often put a shout out to the universities, to Queen's and to Ulster, to see if we can have students who would like to volunteer their time to be involved with that organisationally, or helping on the day, transcribing, etc. So we do have very discrete volunteer opportunities, but because of our funding situation, unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to have interns or placement students, because we just don't have the funds to be able to pay them, even a kind of expenses level. But, you know, as a human rights organisation, we think, oh, everybody should be paid for the work that they do.
Okay, and as a final question to you both, do you have any general tips or advice to level 2 students or people at this stage in their degree for choosing their modules?
Do I have any tips?
You both, yeah.
Choose something that you're passionate about and that you're really interested in. Choose something that will challenge you. I think legal theory is intimidating for law students because it's so different to what you've done before, but the rewards are so vast that you can never undersell it. So I definitely think that's really important. But anything, just choose something you're passionate about, and you know, put your life and soul into it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that completely. I think students now today are so strategic about, and they're thinking so much about what boxes that they have to tick and things in a really formalistic way. And I'm not criticising that. I understand it's a lot to do with the competitive marketplace for jobs and everything, and that's necessary to an extent. And so I think that I understand that students would want to do that to some extent, but I always think there's room for taking subjects that, you know, like legal theory, and subjects that maybe don't fit in neatly to boxes about, you know, what their career aspirations are, but obviously have this kind of facility of developing them in new ways, and developing new skills, and developing their creativity, and develop their critical thinking and stuff. So, you know, I think that legal theory's certainly, you know, an excellent one for that. And as I said before, I think it really underpins a lot of those other, you know, if you're not only underpinning, you know, like your legal skills in general, and as you go forward in their career or whatever, but also your study of other subjects. You know, if you're studying other subjects, developing the skills that we're developing in legal theory will help you in studying those other subjects as well.
Okay, thank you both. You have been listening to LawPod, an informed take on current events brought to you by the law students and staff at Queen's University Belfast. This episode was produced by Melissa McDonnell and Catherine McNeely. Our theme music is Colonel Chocolate and the Justice Triangle. LawPod is funded by Queen's Law School and the Queen's Annual Fund. Thanks to Mark Hanna and Claire McCann for coming in today. You can follow us on social media. We are on Twitter at QEB LawPod. For more information, you can visit our website lawpod.org, and please have a look in the show notes for more information about the topics covered today. You can also find us on iTunes or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. I am Melissa McDonnell. This was LawPod.